talk to Mohammed Shafiq now. He's Chief Executive of the Ramadan Foundation. Good morning to you, Mohammed.
Good morning, Julia.
Do you agree with Paul that actually, these are important issues to be discussed? It's important that teachers are free to show images that are being discussed, and we discuss the values of living in a free and liberal democracy, and sometimes that might involve some people of some faith or not being offended, and that unfortunately is a price worth paying.
Well, first of all, in terms of Paul, he's part of the Henry Jackson Society, which is a pretty right-wing think tank that makes it its mission to target Muslims and our way of life. I mean, this cartoon is offensive. Well, let me at least get a few sentences in before you interject.
The interesting thing is that Paul managed to have a conversation without actually attacking you or criticising you.
Muslims. He's calling the protesters as if it's a beheading video. I mean, how offensive is that? And the idea that Muslims are somehow be forced to have separatism. I mean, just the sort of rhetoric we've heard from him is not surprising, because that's what they do. Now, let's get to the issue of the cartoon.
I'm not going to let that stand, Mohammed, because I've done a lot of interviews with a lot of different people over the years, including the Henry Jackson Society, and I know what they stand for. He wasn't making those comparisons, but he was making the point, which is a fair point for you to answer, that do we want special treatment for Muslims? Do Muslims get a special blasphemy law, as I suggested? Do we expect that Muslim children are uniquely should be separated out from other children in the classroom because they're unable to cope with discussing some of these issues or seeing these images? I would argue that that's actually rather patronising to Muslim children, isn't it?
Well, I think you can just see in the way this interview's been conducted. You allowed Dr. Paul Scott to finish because apparently he's on the right. So you may have the same views as him. As soon as I come on, I get interrupted.
I'll tell you why I interrupted you, because you came on and you started insulting my previous guest. He did not insult you, and he didn't cast aspersions on you. No, because I'm talking over you. Because, Mohammed, would you like to have a conversation about the subject matter, or do you want to just sit here and slag off my previous guest because he doesn't agree with you? Would you like to argue the actual substantive points, or do you want to just slag someone else off?
Julie, do you want to have a debate without siding with the previous guest?
I'm allowed to take. I mean, I'm completely on his side. I completely agree with him. I don't work for the BBC, Mohammed.
We know your politics. We know your politics. Yes. So we know your language. We know what you do.
Yes. But I speak for freedom of speech. Yes, I do. That's what I do.
And I speak for freedom of speech, and I've got the right to say that his offensive words around Muslims acting as if it's a beheading video. Do you think that's acceptable? No, it's not. So let's, if you would allow me to talk about the substantive issue, which you
I was hoping you would. Yes.
Well, I'm glad we got there finally, if I may.
Right, it's 9:29, so if we don't hurry up, we're going to not be able to talk about it at all.
Well, if you give me 2 seconds to at least get a word in edgeways, then we might
Mohammed,
get somewhere.
darling, this victim thing doesn't play very well. Could you answer one of the questions?
Well, at least let me try to answer the question before you interject. And, this is the approach that you adopt. And I just think it's not beneficial.
You're still going.
It's not beneficial.
Do you want to answer a question, or do you want to just criticise me and the previous guest?
Do you want to allow me to at least articulate what I want to say? Where's my freedom of speech without you interrupting me?
Go on.
Where's my freedom of speech? The cartoon itself is offensive to Muslims. And so, yes, it's absolutely proper and right for schools to teach about blasphemy, to teach about individual freedom of speech, and to have a conversation in a respectful and tolerant way. What is not acceptable is to allow caricatures of the Prophet Muhammad with a bomb in his turban to be shown in a school to Muslim pupils who will then be offended and hurt by that. And I just don't think that's the way forward. And so can I just make one final point before you interrupt me? I condemn, as I've always done, Julia, on your program, I've condemned any violence against anybody. And I'd go to that school if the COVID regulations would allow me to. And I would urge parents to remain peaceful. And anybody who's involved in threatening this teacher or this school, I condemn that without any reservation. Is that clear enough for you?
That's 100% clear, and I'm sure everyone would welcome that, and I wouldn't have expected anything less from you. You talk about how we need to be respectful and tolerant, but you say it's offensive to Muslims to see this image. Now, I understand that it is offensive for Muslims to see this image. Do you have, though, a right not to be offended, if that showing the image is important for children to be able to know what they're discussing and what is or what is not reasonable in a liberal free democracy with freedom of speech, freedom of expression, and freedom to criticise faith, because we don't have a blasphemy law in place anymore, that it'd be impossible for kids to have that conversation without actually seeing that image. And that, yes, some may be offended, but they can say, I'm offended, I don't like that image, and here's why. And then you have a debate about it, whether or not other people should be allowed to show that image. But that doesn't need to lead to teachers being suspended or apologies, or, and I wouldn't remotely consider you to be responsible for this at all, but on the sideline also facing death threats and protests outside the school. Why would that uniquely lead, for one religion but not any others, lead to that outcome?
Well, there are people in this country on this debate who want Muslims to be silenced. They somehow don't want us to practice our faith. They have an issue with our halal meat. They have an issue with the hijab or burqa, people wearing that. They have an issue the way we practice our faith and the way we interact with wider society. And then they tell us that, we don't respect freedom of speech. So, we're going to articulate why we're opposed to the depictions of the Prophet Muhammad. We're going to express our freedom of speech and do so in a public way, but in a responsible and respectful way. And I just don't think, Julia, that you can show an image that's offensive in a school or any school to pupils, particularly in this school where I understand there is 75% of the pupils are Muslim. I just don't think it happens. And can I just say,
but your point is, you're saying people are trying to silence Muslims on this. That people criticising the wearing of face veils. I don't like wanting to wear one myself, even for the proposed health reasons. So people criticising that, people criticising different aspects of say animal way animals are treated for halal meat. Those are all legitimate criticisms that people can either agree with or disagree with, and they can debate those. It doesn't. I mean, some people may be motivated by anti-Muslim feeling to make those criticisms. Other people might not. But the point is, we have the freedom to have that conversation. And Muslims who are offended by the showing of this cartoon, whether they're parents or anybody who's just getting involved, has the right to say, I don't like this, I don't agree with this, I'm offended by this. And we have that discussion. But the point is to have that discussion in the way that we had about, say, Life of Brian and Monty Python back, decades ago, without the overriding, pervading threat that at any point this could turn to violence, and people being fearful because of that if they exercise their freedom of speech, that they will face, as happened to Samuel Paty and happened to the Charlie Hebdo magazine writers and cartoonists, they will face death. Now, of course, the vast majority of people in this country of any faith, including Muslims, would never, ever, ever agree with that or support it or do it. Of course not. But the fact that there is that threat, uniquely from one religion, that actually makes it very difficult for people to have a safe debate about this. Do you not agree?
No, I don't agree with you. And I think that the caricature of Muslims that you just set out is what happens often. As I said,
I caricatured Muslims. When did I caricature Muslims?
The single religion you talked about,
which other religious group in this country would react in this way?
Well, I can certainly say to you, if you're talking about the oppression that is directed towards Muslims that we see, and violence is used, rape is used. You've got the Chinese, you've got the Indians, and the far-right Hindu mobs that lynch people in the streets. So, living under these circumstances is unacceptable. I want to concentrate on the fact that there are people who use this cartoon to caricature Muslims. The Charlie Hebdo depiction of the Prophet it's so deeply offensive.
They mocked everybody. They did 1% of their cartoons were of Muhammad. Most of them were actually of the Pope.
Yeah, and we saw what they did when they caricatured Her Majesty the Queen only a few weeks ago in an offensive way, and there was some on the right who were criticising the magazine for that. So
but criticising is fine. Criticising is freedom of speech.
It just shows you the content of this interview, Julia. You're probably interrupting me a million times, and Paul Scott didn't get interrupted a single time. And it just shows you how polarised our debate and politics is, and our national life is, that we can't have a dialogue in this way.
We are having a dialogue.
Well, you're constantly interrupting me as you've done throughout this interview. And you didn't do that to
You've
Paul.
actually had almost 3 times as long to talk as well. I hate to tell you, in terms of timing.
Actually, I think you've had more time to talk
It's
than I
my
did.
show.
It's always a pleasure.
It's my show.
It's always a pleasure.
Mohammed, we'll have to leave it there because we're 6 minutes over time. I thought we were actually having a useful conversation there, but apparently not. Mohammed Shafiq, Chief Executive of the Ramadan Foundation, thank you very much.